I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside. It's so comfortable and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show on the Choose Yourself Network. Today on the James Altucher Show.
We all know what happened in the election.
Yeah.
Trump won. We watched some debates. We listened to the primaries. But you kind of have different ways of presenting it. You have this way of taking the complicated and making it simple, but then it's, of course, entertaining. I like how, for instance, you have weird chapters like what would have happened if all the first ladies, like the men run for president, but then the first ladies
run the country.
And you describe what would have happened in each case. Like, we're out of slavery in 1800 because Sally Hemings would just abolish slavery.
A couple of the chapters like that, one about the first ladies, another one about picking our president by who we'd go on a road trip with. And you think, oh, Trump, golf, private jets. And you think again what it would really be like with him, cooped up with him, for a long period of time.
So with this election, let's get right down to it. How the hell did this happen? So I'm here with PJ O'Rourke. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
You're,
Thank you.
Not only, of course, one of America's most astute political commentators, but an amazing humorist. You started out, you were editor-in-chief, right, of the National Lampoon in the 70s, back in, like, John Belushi days, like, all the way back.
Yeah.
And you've written many bestsellers, Parliament of Horrors, Give War a Chance. What was the name of the economics one? You had this really great economics one.
Just called On the Wealth of Nations.
You have this great way of simply explaining complicated things or supposedly complicated things in a humorous way.
Yeah.
And in fact, with that one, you said it's basically economics is something we do every day, and it's only complicated to economists.
Yes. It's first principles and moral ideas, And that actually, what book was that? It was, I can't remember what it was called, which says maybe I've written more books than I've got things to say.
16 books?
Yeah, 18.
18 books.
Anyway, that was one where I went around to all the lousy, poor countries in the world. Not all of them were lousy, but went around to the poor countries in the world and the rich countries of the world trying to figure out what made the difference. Why did Tanzania, with no population explosion problems, pretty peaceful landscape, political landscape, lots and lots of resources. Why was it probably the poorest country in the world that wasn't in the middle of combat? And on the other hand, Hong Kong, which got nothing. I mean, they have to import their water, and yet they're, on a per capita basis, one of the richest countries in the world. Now,
right.
What's going on here? So that was
what is going on? I want to ask that, but then we're going to get to your book. How the hell did this happen? The election in 2016. I talk about our favorite topic, Donald Trump, everybody's favorite topic in the world. But how does that happen with Tanzania and Hong Kong?
Well, one of the things is property rights. Property rights and rule of law are probably the two most important things that make a country prosperous. You have to have firm property rights, something that keep an eye on with China, because China does not have their property rights stuff very well straightened out. And then you have to have rule of law. It doesn't have to be A1 law. I mean, it can be like a very, it might be an imperfect rule of law. But
What does it mean, rule of law? I don't know.
Well, rule of law means that you can depend upon like the courts and the police departments and so on to basically to protect your person and to protect your property. Now, like
so I'm sorry to interrupt, but take a country like it's in the middle, like let's say Argentina.
Yeah.
All right. So you have police and you have a kind of a first world country sort of, but the police can't be trusted. You don't know if you go to a policeman if they're going to rob you or protect you.
Yeah, I don't actually happen to know in person about the situation in Argentina, but even let's stipulate that you can trust the police. You probably cannot trust the court system.
Right.
And it may be just confused or it may be corrupt. It may be a combination of the two. Argentina's got its property rights thing pretty well done. But of course, any country that's every now and then elects a socialist government, socialism definitionally violates property rights. Socialism is saying, okay, we're going to take from this group of people and hand out to this group of people with no respect for who owns what, because we determine who owns what. So,
well, how do you really feel about socialism?
Yeah, right. Yeah, love it. So, you can have imperfect law. Hong Kong, for instance, has imperfect law. I mean, it's not a democracy, and it's not, it's over-influenced by the mainland Chinese and so on. But the law is dependable. The police are honest. The courts are transparent, and the laws may not be the ideal laws that you would want, but but you're confident that they will be enforced. And so you can operate with confidence in the business arena. And that's really what makes prosperity. Tanzania, while it's not a violent place, and the people in the government I met were likable enough, nonetheless, it's disorganized. It's not even clear where officially their capital is. They've got some new capital they're building in the middle of nowhere. But countries love to build new capitals, and that always confuses things because the actual capital is Arusha, but there's a theoretical capital out in the middle of nowhere. And then if you go down to the coast, that's actually where all the government offices are. So it's like completely confusing. And, it's partly because it always has been a very poor country. They don't have adequate policing. I didn't run across a lot of complaints that the police were corrupt. They're just not there.
Well, let me play devil's advocate just a little. What about places like, let's say, Israel, which has some quasi-socialist stuff going on, but it's a very strong place to start a company and build a company. Lots of
definitely
innovation happening there. Rule of law.
Yeah. And property rights can endure a certain amount of large social safety net, I draw a difference between socialism and a country with large benefits. In fact, I went to Sweden and Cuba. So I said, here's socialism that works. Here's socialism that really doesn't work. And, part of that, of course, is the Swedes. Milton Friedman was once being pestered by a Swedish social democrat, economist. And he said, in Sweden, we have no poverty. And Milton Friedman said, that's interesting because among Swedes in the United States, we have no poverty. So part of it are, there are cultural characteristics to this too, and Israelis are extremely hardworking, extremely innovative, and fired by knowledge that they need to be economically successful in order to deal with the situation that they're in.
So what I want to talk about two things. One is how you've had to have you got to have basically the dream career all your life. You have the kind of job and career you must have dreamed as a kid,
but I didn't. Yeah.
Okay, but we'll get to that.
Yeah.
And then I want to talk about how the hell did this happen? The name of this book.
Sure.
And we now have a president that you did not expect it to happen.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, you've been kind of a lifelong Republican, and you endorsed Hillary Clinton for this election.
Grudgingly, yeah.
Grudgingly.
Very grudgingly.
And you write about that in this book. Like, when I see a book like this, the book itself, as a whole is funny. I mean, even the title, "How the hell did this happen?" suggests that it's about the election. You say the election of 2016, but it suggests not only that it's about the election, but you're going to present some things in almost an absurdist manner inside the book because it's about something that's very high stakes and professional, a presidential election. Yeah. But you're right away saying, how the hell did this happen?
Yeah, it was amateur hour. You know, I mean, for something that's highly professional and extremely important, it was amateur hour.
Right, and then so then throughout the book, you kind of explain why with each candidate why it was amateur hour, like how ludicrous either their campaign promises were, or their campaign strategies, or how the debates were set up, or every aspect of it actually. And so there's humor on, like, let's say 3 different levels. There's kind of the overall topic, there's the way you structure the book, and then there's kind of the line item jokes almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. And like how far, like if in a book like this, there's a danger almost. You have to have that line of like, okay, we're talking about a very serious topic where I'm trying to impart an opinion and information, but I still have to be funny because I'm a humorist and that's how I'm setting up this book. How this is almost going to sound like a naive question, so forgive me if it is, but how long do you go writing before you have to include another humorous thing? Like, how did you pressure yourself to be, okay, it's been 3 paragraphs, now I got to throw in a joke?
I was million years ago, like back in the 70s, I was having some fight with my girlfriend, and I stayed for a couple of days over at I borrowed Doug Kenny's apartment, one of the founders of the Lampoon, and he was off someplace. And he had a manuscript in his typewriter. And of course, I couldn't resist looking. And the manuscript would go, blah, 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 insert joke here. Blah, 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 insert joke here. Blah, 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 blah,
so he knew,
insert joke.
Where the beats
needed to go. Yeah, he needed where the beats had to, he needed to, And after you do that for a long time, you get a feeling about, when's, you need a punchline here. You need a punchline there.
Because attention spans, particularly for books, I don't know the statistics on these things, but people have so many more choices for their attention. Instead of reading this book, they could read Donald Trump's tweets, for instance.
Exactly.
There's a billion things out there. So for you to keep someone's attention, how do you, other than being just interesting and provocative about the election, you've got to have a sense of, okay, insert joke here.
That's right.
And how was that a distinct pressure you gave yourself, or did it just naturally happen as you were writing?
Well, a little bit of both, but it's always there. You know that there are a lot of ways that let's see, I've got a little thing that I do about this, particularly for journalist students, is that any good piece of nonfiction writing, it's got to be informative or educational or entertaining. Okay, now, it's great if it's all 3. But listen, if your information is so startling, so important, that just the information, that will carry the thing.
But it still needs, like, the beats. It's still, if it's that way, it needs every page of something startling.
Well, I'll get to that. Because, if your news is that a pirated airplane just flew into the World Trade Center, you can stop with information, Now, at education, which is a little tougher, is when you tell people, you don't tell them something they didn't know. You're telling something that they did know, but you're telling them what it means. And that, of course, is what most of the op-ed people, some with more success than others, say in the New York Times, do. And entertainment is simply keeping people's attention. There are lots of ways to do it. You can be charming, you can be funny, you can be, the world is about to end, so you have to pay attention to, you can be startling, you can be vulgar. Trump is very good at keeping people's attention.
Right.
And so I said, and as a nonfiction writer, if you intend to be some kind of nonfiction writer, you have to always keep those 3 things in mind. If it doesn't have any information or educational value, that is to say, no information or no explication in it, it better be damn entertaining. Okay, Thurber could do it. Can you? If it's all explication, if it's all education, you had better be really good at explaining yourself to people. But you'll find it easier if you stick some entertainment in there.
If it's educational, it's got to say something they don't know. And again, it's got to say it pretty quickly and often.
Yeah, quickly and often. You got kind of tell them you told them, tell them, you tell them what you're going to tell them, and tell them what you told them, And
I mean, here, I think with how the hell did this happen, you have the information because you kind of go through, here's the campaign here. I mean, it was the information writes itself in the sense that you're going through a timeline of,
It's in
of a
there
high
already,
stakes event.
Yeah, and it's organized already because it's a chronological.
And the education, like we all know what happened in the election.
Yeah.
Trump won. We watched some debates. We will listen to the primaries. Everybody listens to different things. But you kind of have different ways of presenting it. Like you, for instance, you present, their campaign strategy. I mean, their campaign, what do you call it? Their platforms, their issues in entertaining ways.
Yeah,
So
and
Bernie
I try
Sanders,
and take them apart. I try and take the platform apart, examine it carefully.
Right, and again, you have this way of taking the complicated and making it simple, and that's often the bridge is humor to do that.
Yeah.
But then it's, of course, entertaining. And the other educational thing, I like how, for instance, you have weird chapters like, this is what would have happened if all the first ladies, like the men run for president, but then the first ladies run
the country.
And you describe like what would have happened in each case. Like we're out of slavery in 1800 because Sally Hemings would just abolish slavery.
Yeah.
So it was, so you have ways of kind of like with each chapter, okay, how am I going to twist this and make it interesting? So you kind of do all three things with this, which I think is the most successful thing you
a
can
couple
do.
of the chapters like that one about the first ladies, another one about like picking our president by who we'd go on a road trip with. And you think, oh, Trump, golf, private jets, and think again what it would really be like with him, cooped up with him, for a long period of time. Some of the chapters are really pure entertainment. And then I've got like a chapter or two in there, like where the heck this weird primary and caucus system came from, which is actually mostly mostly educational. We all know they exist, but nobody knows the history of these things. I didn't either. I had to look it up.
Well, what's fascinating too, you mentioned how most voters in a primary, I forgot the exact percentage number you say, but this high number of voters in a primary are basically over the age of 50.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one time this is several years ago, I was thinking of running for Congress.
Yeah.
And I called up some people and got some good advice, and the advice was only campaign in senior citizen homes because they win every primary for local elections.
They do vote, yeah.
So
I forget what the percentage was either, but it was like a very small percentage of eligible voters.
I think it was like 86%. You said so, some abnormally high number.
Yeah, but I mean, who gave us Clinton and Trump as the candidates? That came down, according to New York Times analysis at least, that came down to only 14% of eligible voters.
Huh.
Of all the people who are eligible to vote in the United States, it was just 14% who decided the caucuses and the primaries. That was the margin in there.
So compare that to how many people, in terms of percentage of eligible voters, how many people vote in the general election?
Oh, well, presidential election brings out more than usual. I forget exactly what the percentage is, but it's not overwhelming. It's not like, whoa, my gosh. It's
not like
not
90%.
Not one of those Soviet elections where 104% of the people voted, and
it's like 40% or something.
It's, around 50. It's around 40 for congressional, so like 50 plus. We might have hit 60. This was a pretty good turnout year. Not record, but pretty good turnout. Actually, first Obama presidential run, I think, was the highest modern turnout.
All right.
And you can't compare them because when you go back into the 19th century, you're talking about only propertied white males. So sure, it was easy to get them out.
If you think about it, until relatively recently, like maybe a generation before you were born, only a small number of Americans were even allowed to vote. I mean, half the country was out of action.
Yeah, women don't get to
1920.
vote until the 1920s. Blacks were denied to vote by various means up until the end of the 1960s. Kids couldn't vote. You had to be 21 to vote until I was in college. So it was. And then there were all sorts of groups who were discouraged from voting or sort of coerced into voting the way the block captain and the precinct captain, and the ward healers, wanted them to vote. All the ghettoized immigrants, whether they were living in Little Italy, whether they were Chinese, whether they were Jewish, they had the Democratic city apparatus like kind of showing them what to vote for, And many of these people spoke English not so well. And we're a little mystified by the American political system, which was completely different from any place that they've been. So, The block captain would come down and say, you vote here. You vote here.
Well, it's interesting because in this election, I think, and you made a very interesting statement towards the end. It might have been the last chapter or second to last chapter, where you basically said, I'm gonna rephrase it from how you said it. But this wasn't so much a, let's say, black versus white or Republican versus Democrat or liberal versus conservative kind of election, but this is people who felt they had no control over things in their life versus people who felt they controlled everything. So, and I thought that was very astute, because what happened is the people who felt they had no control, they loved both Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump.
And there were people who voted, by means of volte-face between primary and general election. There are people who voted for, quite a few people who voted for both.
Yeah, Bernie Sanders in the primary and then Donald Trump.
And Donald Trump in the general.
Right, and I think that is very accurate, regardless of what they stood for. I think Donald Trump, we
stood for disruption.
Yeah, he stood for disruption, right? It's almost unclear now what he stood for,
Quite
didn't
unclear.
stand for. Yeah, and yet he represent, like you pointed out very clearly, we knew exactly what Hillary Clinton stood for, which is business as usual.
Actually, in way too much detail. If you listen to any of her campaign speech, it was like, stop, I get it.
So like, given the problems on both sides, which you point out, so much, and I want to get to the primaries too and all that, but why did you endorse anybody? Do you want to do a road trip with Hillary Clinton?
No, of course not. It was partly for surprise value. I must confess, I'm having a little goof, but I did decide. And I don't remember exactly. I think the thing that put me over on I did decide early on not to vote for Trump. And I think it was his insult of John McCain was the thing where he went too far. But I'll tell you, the other thing that had been bugging me all along was the scapegoating of immigrants. I mean, you just don't do that in America. I just think that was like, to me, that was like his version of calling Trump supporters a basket of deplorables, his scapegoating of immigrants.
I agree with you because, of course, America has been built on immigration.
Right.
But essentially what he did is take the advice of pollsters combined with his media talents.
Yeah.
And he said, okay, I'm either going to be president or not.
Yeah.
This is the path to become president. So he did it.
Yeah, I have a feeling.
If he didn't do that, then he wouldn't be president.
No, I think that's exactly right. Just as although, Brexit was framed as like a protest against EU mattress measurements and cheese naming rules and so on, it was actually about immigrants. And actually NPR did a pretty good debrief. They went around after Brexit and they did man on the street, woman on the street things in districts that had voted heavily for Brexit. And all people would start out with a little bit of, with a little bow to, oppressive EU regulations. And then they would get right to, this isn't the England I grew up in, and like the Polish plumber problem and so on and so forth.
And that's, of course, why you see Le Pen getting such popularity in France right now. And I mean, you mentioned also it's the largest political party in France. Even whether she wins or not, it's still the largest political party.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And she's doing that same now. I think it resonates even better in France than it did in Britain. The British are too conscious of morality and so on to vote. Very, very few of them actually vote for an anti-immigrant candidate, but they could make an anti-immigrant gesture with the Brexit vote, without sort of violating their conscience. Now the immigrants in Britain are like immigrants in the United States tend to acclimatize and acclimate and get absorbed into the society much quicker than they do in continental Europe. I mean,
I think
the French immigrants are much more alienated than, most British immigrants that you meet, especially like people who came over, say, 20, 30 years ago from Pakistan or Bangladesh or something, or India, are more British than the British,
So with this election here in the U.S., let's get right down to it. How the hell did this happen? Like in the primaries, it's like Trump says, he was up against 18 people. They all seemed like, like everybody at some point, the media had declared, oh, here's our candidate. Yeah. Whether it's Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or Ben Carson, what the hell did happen?
Yeah, well, I'm a little. I really don't have a quick and easy answer to that. I was a little mystified myself. I thought if there was going to be a rebellion in the United States, to go by prior experience, it would center around somebody, a social conservative, somebody like Mike Huckabee. And as a matter of fact, I have a chapter in here which I reread not too long ago about Mike Huckabee where I am, and I said,
You
Mike,
tear him apart.
I do, and Mike, I apologize. I don't like social conservatives. It's true. I mean, I don't like the ideology of social conservatives, but I have nothing against Mike himself, and actually, he looks like a much better choice for with hindsight. But I thought that that's where the rebellion against the status quo would focus around the social conservatives, like.
Although let me play devil's advocate on that. I mean, social conservatives have had 4 or 5 decades of candidates to kind of make their stance against the establishment, and they just never really win. I mean, even we've been through Reagan and 2 Bushes, and they all act like social conservatives, but they never really were.
No, they're not. In fact, actually, in the case of the senior George Bush, really not.
He's totally like a northeastern liberal.
Yeah,
and by the way, I'm not saying I'm apolitical. I'm not saying good or bad on that.
Yeah,
it's
just a
not
fact.
What he presented to the public. I mean, he raised taxes and it's total liberal. And even his son was,
George W. Bush wanted to do an immigration, amnesty, which I thought was a good idea.
Yeah.
Myself. But yeah, he was no raving social conservative. So I was just simply wrong. I thought, in the past, this anti-establishmentarianism has tended to coalesce around a Pat Buchanan sort of type. And a reason I was so tough on Huckabee was I considered him to be the best candidate of that bunch. And that is to say, I considered him the most likely. If there was going to be a social conservative revolt against the establishment, I considered Huckabee to be the strongest candidate advocating that. And so I really shredded him in there. And like now, I totally apologize. First I think I was a little too hard on him, and second,
you were harsh on the religion.
I was harsh on the religion. Yeah. Even though I'm a religious person. I was harsh on the religion, and looking back at it, I think I made a preemptive strike on a target that wasn't there. Not the first time that's ever happened.
It's okay. You're a humor writer.
Yeah, right.
So okay. So then we go through into the primaries, and just one by one. And again, I'm not saying this is good or bad. I sort of view primaries as like almost like watching the Hunger Games or something.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's more like you're not really analyzing what their issues are, because nobody ever really says what their issues are. That's all kind of like BS as part of the game.
Right.
But like just strategically, we just watched this one guy pick them off like targets, one at a time.
Each had a flaw, which of course is to be expected. Every candidate does, but each one's particular flaw turned out to be fatal. And I think there was like a certain amount of just dumb bad luck involved in this. Jeb Bush was. I saw him at a small town meeting in New Hampshire. He was great. He was absolutely great. Completely plausible as president. Warm, outgoing, handled the questions really well. But he had that last name. And a lot of people wouldn't vote for Hillary for that very same reason. And and that Jeb was just. It wasn't going to happen for Jeb.
Is there any way strategically he could have distanced himself, not from the name, but let's say, is there any way he could have said, I stand for the people who feel like they have no control?
I don't think so, no. He's too much of an establishment figure. But he'd been a darn good governor of Florida. But he was a very lukewarm campaigner in larger settings. He was good in small groups, but in larger settings, he was tepid.
What does that mean? He would make a weak speech, or he wasn't funny?
It just wasn't like, what did he just say? He didn't show force of personality. He didn't, there was something unleaderly like about him in appearance. I think that was.
I thought Marco Rubio was going to be a much stronger candidate.
Me too, and he just not seasoned in the barrel long enough. He got this phenomenon. On my heart, when he got stuck on that, Obama didn't do this by accident. When he got stuck on that, I was just crying for him out of sympathy, because anybody who's done a lot of interviews, like when I'm promoting this book, I'll do like I'll sit down in the studio and I'll do 10 minutes on 10 or 12 talk radio shows in a row. And you get down to the point where you're around about number 8, where you go, did I just say that to the last person who interviewed me, or did I just say that? And that's what happened to Marco Rubio. He'd been out saying this stuff over and over and over again, and the needle got stuck in the groove.
That was sort of like his Rick Perry moment.
Yes, exactly. And listeners who don't understand that metaphor of needle stuck in the groove, wiki it.
Right. It's an old. There has been records for a while.
There haven't been any records for a while.
By the way, Rick Perry with the glasses, he kind of like tried to, just with a single pair of glasses, he tried to say, I'm an intellectual.
Yeah.
Forget about what happened 4 years ago.
Yeah.
But that didn't work for him. People saw right through that. It's not like he's Clark
But
Kent.
my
Superman.
heart went out to him too, in a way, when he couldn't remember the federal agencies he was going to eliminate. I mean, haven't we all had that moment?
Sure.
Everybody who's over 40 has had that moment.
Sure, but there's Ron Paul sitting right next to him in the 60s saying, poking at it. Like he saw the weakness, and that's a professional. He poked at it and got him.
He did. Yeah.
But I had a chance during this election and right before the primaries actually to meet Rand Paul. Also, you said met
I
Rand
liked
Paul.
Rand. Of
He
all the
seemed like a
candidates,
straight shooter.
absolutely a great guy.
And this is Rand the younger, not Ron.
not Ron. Although I know Ron too, and I really like
Ron's
Ron.
been on this
but
podcast?
I'm not. I'm not sure I want Ron for my president. But that takes nothing away from how I feel about him. He is. Guy's committed to his. He reasons out. He's got a set of values. He reasons out those set of values. He's a little unrelenting about it. But. Huge respect for him.
In my podcast with him, I remember I asked him, you've been in, you were in Congress however many years, 25 years. You got like one bill passed that entire time. It seems like you're totally dysfunctional. But to his credit,
he had a
took
response
question
to
like
that,
that
I
and
bet.
had a great response.
Yeah,
So,
don't you wish there were more like me that only got one bill passed?
right. Or he basically kind of threw it at Congress that he had ideas, but he couldn't really. He wasn't
Nobody
really
was
going to play the
listening.
party line.
But I had a couple long talks with Rand. I really liked him. He does not. He has not yet learned how to translate his ideas into the kind of sound bites that you need to campaign.
But maybe he'll never do that because
maybe
that's the reason why you liked him is that he was a human being.
He was
like
very much a
someone
human
you would
being.
sit down like on the porch and you're just talking about what happened in the newspaper.
And you
that
could
day.
ask him about an issue, and he would say, which this is really rare among politicians, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. I really have to do more due diligence on that and think it through more. That's a very tough question,
I sort of felt like
This is like not during the campaign. This is like back 2 years before the campaign when I was talking to him.
Yeah, I sort of felt like almost like he's a libertarian.
He is.
So like, okay, he'll fall back on, well, let's let the market decide.
Mm-hmm.
But on like moral issues where it's pretty clear, it's not so black and white for him.
No, of course not. No, it's like, say health insurance. I'm very conservative about, I don't want a single player national health service stuff, but large, wealthy nation like us, nobody should be beggared by their medical costs. Nobody should lose their house because of medical costs. The boat, maybe, but not the house, And I don't think that in my mind, it wouldn't be that hard to create a catastrophic insurance program that covered everybody in the country. But, never mind.
Let's stop to take a quick break. We'll be right back. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues.
Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.
Every podcast I do is so personal and special to me. The podcast is all about how people can be better performers, even peak performers at whatever it is they're passionate about. So help people discover this podcast. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also check out the show notes at jamesaltucher.com/podcast. And also, if you want to get my blog updates and other updates that I do, sign up for the newsletter at jamesaltucher.com. Once again, thanks so much for joining me on the journey of this podcast. Instead of trying to solve like a massive problem all at once, why not start with, okay, everybody gets catastrophic insurance?
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is the main thing. Like, for instance, I only have catastrophic. Like,
Oh, me too. I mean, I'm self-employed, and you know, I'm like, you know, I'm on Medicare now, so whatever, you know. But
you're an old man.
I'm an old man, yeah. But for years, and we still have it for the rest of the family, we have catastrophic. And the theory, you know, is what we would try and find the largest deductible we could get, as long as the top end was very high. Because our figure was, you know, we got now 4 members of the family covered by the insurance. And so what if not so what, but I mean, okay, the deductible is $5,000. Everything goes wrong that year. It's $20,000. That will hurt, but it doesn't destroy.
Right.
You know, and it doesn't wipe us out, you know. And on
even for an impoverished, like a family living in poverty, $20,000 is of course amazingly difficult. They can't pay it, but they can work it out. It's not going to
it doesn't
plague them
destroy
for
their
generations.
lives. Yeah, that's right. And for the poorest people, we could bring that, you know, that minimum down considerably to some percentage of their income, something like, you know, the old standard for tax deductibility of medical expenses was 10%. If it was 10% of more than 10% of your income, you could deduct. Before we got all complicated about this.
So you said though every candidate had a fatal flaw. I would argue Trump had a fatal flaw. And again, I'm
Seemed to have
advocate.
hundreds of them. He seemed to have hundreds of them. I mean, you know, not a day would go by he wouldn't say or do something. You say, well, that's the end of that, you know. I mean, finally, when that Billy Bush tape came out, you go, oh, forget it. You know, I mean, you're not president. I thought this right down to election night. In fact, when I finally got tired of watching election results, I mean, I had a couple drinks, so maybe I wasn't quite so alert about like, ooh, there went North Carolina, ooh, there went Florida. But I went to bed not knowing and still sort of expecting to wake up to find Hillary president. You know, and so cool. So how did Trump do this?
And in the primaries first, how did he do it?
Yeah, I mean, he just made a lot more noise than all the other candidates put together. Each of the candidates was flawed, but he just attracted a lot more attention to himself. And he reminded me, I mean, Trump has always reminded me of raising toddlers. You've been through this. You know how it is with kids. They want attention. They really, really want attention. Good attention is great. But if they can't get good attention, any attention will do. So it's like, Dad won't play Yahtzee with me, or Hungry Hungry Hippo. Dad won't play Hungry Hungry Hippo with me, so I'll crawl over and drink bleach under the sink. You know, it's like kids. You know, and so Trump just loves attention and drew a huge amount of attention to him, and plus, I think a lot of us in the news business especially, didn't really realize that people thought they knew him from The Apprentice. So
he was like a friend in some sense.
He was like a friend, yeah. And the weird thing is, it dawned on me finally that people in the news business never watched The Apprentice. Not because we're snobs, not because we only watch like upscale PBS TV or anything like that. It's because we're in the news business. We don't want to hear the phrase, "you're fired," ever again. We know that phrase, you know?
Right.
So we hadn't watched that. I forced myself to watch that. And Trump's interesting, you know, he's this big, blustery, goofy guy. He's like the boss you'd love to have, not at work, but after work. So you can go to the bar and talk to your workmates, and say, you won't believe what the jerk did today. You won't believe what he said today.
I mean, I loved the first couple seasons of The Apprentice.
Good.
Like, he did a good job
He
on
plays
TV.
Trump much better than Alec Baldwin does. I mean, he's really plays Trump well. But then the part of The Apprentice that I hadn't thought about or known about, really, he will stop and break the fourth wall, and then he will give out this business advice. And it's not actually bad business advice. It's sort of like posters in the break room kind of business advice, quit dreaming, wake up and do something, that kind of stuff, it's like,
So it's like kind of like this high level, the kind of stuff you'd find on Instagram, like photos.
Yeah,
but people
yeah.
respond to it. They
do.
like it. They click like
and they
on
like
that.
the combination of this kind of blustery this sort of like Uncle Scrooge, who's the boss in the Dagwood comic strip, I mean, that kind of character who would every now and then stop and give you this avuncular advice. And so they felt like they kind of knew this guy, and so that when he would do weird things, they would kill anybody else's political career. They're going, oh, that's just him, That's he says stuff like that. I mean it.
So do you think that opens the door? Like, let's say take someone like Marco Rubio as an example, and I'll just use Twitter followers as a metric. So let's say Marco Rubio had a couple 100,000 Twitter followers, and Donald Trump in the beginning maybe had 2 or 3 million.
Yeah.
So do you think this opens the door in future elections for people to say, oh, I have 3 million Twitter followers and people sort of like me on TV or in the movies, I have a chance?
Yep, it certainly does. I mean, we have been sort of moving towards the celebrity president for quite a while.
Reagan was a celebrity president.
Reagan was a celebrity president, George H.W. Bush was not. Clinton had a little bit more of that. He wasn't a TV personality, but he kind of acted like one, George W. Bush, no, but Obama had that public presence.
Yeah.
I mean, there was an element of celebrity. He was kind of a upscale celebrity. I mean, the people who read the New York Review of Books, knew who he was. But he was nonetheless a kind of celebrity, particularly because he wrote a very good book about growing up in his really peculiar set of circumstances.
And also his speech at the 2004 Democratic Convention got a lot of publicity.
Yeah, it was good. And, he was good. He was, he was kind of cool guy, and he was like...
You'd take a road trip with him.
You totally would, Was it Joe Biden said, he got in so much trouble for it. He's like a clean looking, good looking.
Very articulate.
Very articulate. But, Biden
how did Barack pick him as vice president after that? The guy uses the most racist stereotype. Oh, I'm going to make him the second in command of the entire country.
I think Obama thought it was funny, too, because it's not like Biden was wrong. I mean, he had this, And, of course, the truth of the matter is Barack Obama is no more African-American than you or I. I mean, he is a total singularity. I mean, he's got this, crazy hippie mom from Iowa. He's raised in Hawaii by these leftist grandparents. He lives in Indonesia for a while. His dad's from Kenya. There's not another one out there like that. He's got a once-off life story. But what he is, what category he fits in. It's a category of one. There is no category.
Well, I'm going to ask you about that in a little bit because we'll talk about 2020. But getting back to this again. So everybody had their fatal flaw. Trump somehow knew how to pick at it, and his fatal flaws were sort of washed over because people felt like there's that so-called Dunbar number where everybody's everybody's brain thinks they could know 150 people.
That's right.
In reality, we only know about a dozen people well.
That's
but
right.
If someone's in your living room on TV a lot, you think you know them well.
You think they're one of the 150.
Right. So Trump, as opposed to the other primary candidates, kind of survived because he's part of people's living room.
That is very much the case. And as a matter of fact, that's so much the case that if I were rewriting this book, I'd steal that from you and put
All
that
right,
in there.
you're welcome when the next article you write about this.
Yeah.
And so
that's definitely the case.
And then Bernie Sanders, I would say Bernie Sanders versus Hillary on the other side of the issue. So Bernie Sanders had a lot of passionate supporters, so passionate, like you said, they didn't when Bernie Sanders didn't win the primary, these supporters didn't even vote for Hillary.
Yeah.
But Bernie Sanders might have been the only one with a consistent platform, the only guy who actually believed in his platform.
It was a scary platform, but it was consistent.
Right,
and
he broke
stuck
it down
to
why it was scary, but he believed it.
Oh yeah, and I believe he believed in it. And he's so obviously a straight shooter. I mean, he's like the Ron Paul of the left.
Right.
I mean, he's like or he's the Pat Buchanan of the left. I mean, when he says it, he means it.
Yeah.
And people really, really were attracted to that. I don't think that Bernie would have stood a chance in the general election because he's just too alien a type for most regular Americans,
Yeah, it's a 76-year-old bald Jewish guy with a heavy accent.
Who's been living in Vermont, for like a millennium and hasn't lost his Brooklyn accent.
Right. But here's the thing about, like, you compare his platform just now to Pat Buchanan. The thing about Pat Buchanan is his fatal flaw almost is that he was like this weird Holocaust denier too. He had like some weird side things.
Yeah,
whereas
he did.
Bernie Sanders simply just said, "Okay, let's try to take care of everyone." Which even if you do it in a way that doesn't technically work, people hear those first words and say that, "Oh, that makes sense. Let's take care of everyone."
Yeah, and it's not a wrong sentiment. I've never disagreed with the left because with the intelligent with liberals, let's say, liberals and the decent, intelligent members of the left. I've never objected to their aim, their ultimate aim, which is to make life good for everybody. I think that their heart is in the right place, but it's not for nothing that they're called bleeding hearts. So it's just And Bill Buckley's always had a great response to people on the left who would tell him something like, there should be a basic minimum income for everybody in the United States, or, single-payer health care. He would say, that is a nice idea. That's a nice idea. And he wasn't being like bitterly ironic about that. He meant it. It was a nice idea. It just can't be done. It's just, it's just physically, materially impossible.
Or it's hard. Like, let's say the country was wealthier. Let's say we were
say we're really, twice as wealthy.
Yeah, then it might be possible. And by the way, more things are possible every year with technology and so on.
Absolutely. And we've come a long way on this front. But the other thing is that the liberals and the left often don't see is the price that comes with these. We've had a pretty good social safety net in place now since the 60s, and we have yet, in certain ways, certain pockets of poverty are worse than ever. Why is that? Even though the funding for the post mid-60s funding for these disadvantaged people is much greater, and the programs available many more of them. And yet, their life situation is actually, in many cases, worse than it was before the Lyndon Johnson's Great Leap Forward.
Well, and
why?
This goes down to the whole question of who is the better allocator of capital. Is it should
capitalists?
Us individual right? So should individuals hold on to their money and create businesses and hire people for jobs?
And indeed charities.
Yeah, or should the government allocate capital? And
government turns out to be not so good at
right,
it.
But nobody seems to really get that because the sentiment is a nice idea.
The sentiment is a nice idea. And the thing is that these are the issues and this is why I, would call for America to have a radical moderates, because these are things that really need to be thrashed out, and they can be thrashed out.
But let's just, and again, I have never voted. Some people say that's horrible of me, whatever. I try to create impact where I can, but some people would say, like, Bill Clinton was a radical moderate. And
there's something to that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. He had some other problems.
Right. And
there's something to that.
And then what is up with Hillary in the general election? She wins the popular vote, but you kind of piece it together in the book. Like, she almost looked like like guilty in the debates. Like she couldn't really get it together. Whereas
she is just a terrible campaigner. She is just a terrible I have it on good. I've never met her. I was at a small dinner having to do with like something. It was a very odd dinner. It was a dinner celebrating the art that we put around at our embassies all around the world. Much of which is actually not very good, but some of it is very nice. It's
Again,
all abstract.
Government allocating,
government
capital.
allocating capital. It's all it's all abstract, and so it won't offend anybody or anything. And anyway, she was funny. She was charming. She gave a little talk at this dinner. I didn't actually get to meet her, but I sat with one of her aides, and we had a very nice, very pleasant dinner. And I've been told by any number of people who would know that she can be very warm and funny and so on in person. Yet the minute she gets up on the stump, something goes wrong.
I think it's almost like she has bad media trainers. Like somehow, whoever told her to act that way during the debates was just wrong.
You are so right about that. My wife was worked for a PR and a marketing firm in Washington until she left to start the O'Rourke Child, Dog, and Chicken Farm up in New Hampshire.
The prestigious O'Rourke.
Yes, the prestigious, yes, where she is CEO. Anyway, she kept looking at Hillary and saying, we did this all the time. We would have these like corporate CEOs who were just terrible on television, and it can be fixed.
Yeah.
We'd send them to somebody, and they would fix it. I mean, you can't turn everybody into Ronald Reagan, but you can turn them into George W. Bush.
Well, she said 30 years in the public eye to
you
get
would
better.
Think, does she refuse to listen? Are people scared to tell her? Or I don't know what it is. Does she feel that, she's being patronized when people tell her to change, her, is she insecure about who she is and feels that like if she were to put a little polish on this, it would be somehow a betrayal of her innermost whatevers, I just haven't got the slightest idea. But yeah, you would look at her problems and the extent of her experience in public life, and you would say, this is so fixable.
So
it didn't get fixed.
So, basically, setting the popular vote aside, which is a big issue for people, but clearly he had a strategy where, okay, this is the way. It's the same as the primaries. This is the path to winning. I don't need to think about the popular vote. I need to think about where to get the electors.
That is what I tell when people hold up that popular vote thing. And of course, we went through this with Al Gore also. I said, you really don't know. You really don't know what the outcome was because if we elected presidents by means of popular vote, the campaigning would be so different. And indeed, the candidates might be different. The whole structure of an American presidential race would be so radically different if it were a campaign strictly for popular votes that I don't think one can safely predict what the outcome would have been in any given election.
Also, if it was just popular vote, chances are whoever was either the governor of California or New York would win every election.
Maybe, but at the same time, there's, sort of a nationwide resentment against California in a way. There's, that feeling especially strong out in the Midwest that every now and then the nation gets tilted and everything that's loose rolls out to California.
Right. But if you get all of California's votes and all of New York's votes, then you
got
just pick
it.
up a few in Chicago.
If you can find a candidate, and of course that's basically how most liberal candidates, post-World War II liberal candidates have won the election was, getting the two coasts together and picking up a little in Chicago.
So let me ask you this. Like, I feel like this book doesn't come across as liberal or Republican, and like you say, you grudgingly endorsed Hillary, right, and it was a little bit of a goof. Let's just look at the presidency in general. When has there ever been a quality president?
Yeah.
Because I'm even wondering, obviously it's written into law. There's various things the president does, and without him, you kind of you need an executive branch. But who has been a good president ever?
Yeah, it's tough. You have to go back to somebody like Lincoln, and even Lincoln, suspended habeas corpus. You can almost date like the excessive, what I consider to be the excessive power of the chief executive. You can almost date it back to to Lincoln's time in office. That he vastly expanded the powers of the president, or assumed powers that the president, had not previously been, hadn't previously known he had, And that does not take away anything from him being a great man, but, it shows you that even the highest quality possible president carries certain dangers.
You could argue there. I mean, I don't know the history that well, but James Buchanan, Franklin Pierce, and Millard Fillmore, like the guys before him, were so afraid to take power because they didn't want to get in the middle of that mess that Lincoln was just restoring some balance there. But let's just even say since Lincoln. Okay, because Lincoln could be an argument either way, but let's just—I mean, not really an argument, but a lot of people will talk the talk with Lincoln. But since Lincoln, who has earned the right to say I was a good president?
I would say Eisenhower.
All right.
A very
country grew.
Peaceful. The guy was very moderate. He
got us out of North Korea.
He was not way ahead of the curve on social issues, but it was Eisenhower's belief. I was just reading Philip Johnson, a British journalist, and he emphasized that Eisenhower felt that many of the social problems that he faced, that they were difficult, not intractable, but he felt we would grow, that with increasing prosperity we would grow out of them. And the single most important thing was that America have a balanced budget and have capital available for greater investment and greater growth. And we, of course, know from his farewell address that he was skeptical about huge military budgets and huge corporations that benefited from those huge military budgets. A very good, very moderate, modest president.
The problem even with that is, so during his terms, he executed on that and things seemed well. Yeah. And then immediately afterwards, we're in Vietnam, which led to the inflation, and depression, recessions. And then you can argue the same thing with Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge maybe believed the same way, and then just 2 years later, the Great Depression started. Yeah. And World War II shortly after
and also that. Coolidge's relative inactivity, although I think it was a benign inactivity, led to the election of Hoover, who was not in of himself a bad president, but he was a technocrat. And a lot of the Roosevelt program, the program that we credit or blame Roosevelt, New Deal, actually started under Harding. Harding was very much in favor of the same general kind of program. Harding was then, I don't mean Harding, I'm Hoover. Harding was kind of a bum, but and kind of a bunch of corrupt buddies. But Hoover, who was to go on to prove himself to be an absolutely wonderful person. I mean, he kept Europe from starving in the midst and in the aftermath of World War II. He was basically the guy who got the relief over there properly distributed and kept the continent, from starvation. But as a president, he was one of these technocrats. Let the experts fix it. He was our first managerial president. And so a lot of the things, obviously Franklin Roosevelt was a great president in terms of lifting the national morale and getting us through a really dangerous period. But he left a legacy of huge government behind him. He also was cold. He was cold and gullible at the same time. He was cold about the Jewish refugee situation. We had plenty of space and opportunity in America to take in everybody that we could get here, and he didn't do that. It was fine if you were a big fancy intellectual, or a famous artist or something, but if you were just some schmo, peddling things on the street, in Belarus, no,
right?
No, and he was trusting of Stalin. That's probably not forgivable.
Mistake number one.
It's probably not forgivable.
So 2020, okay, so in between now and 2020, Trump does, whether you like Trump or not, it seems like he's going to have a hard time wrangling in Congress. Yeah. McCain and his faction who control the Senate don't like him.
No.
Paul Ryan probably doesn't like him. It's a little unclear. He's playing a game.
Yeah.
So how's Trump ever going to win anything in Congress, and how no one's going to win anything for the next 4 years in Congress?
Yeah, and of course that Congress is going to turn on him I fully expect the predictable post-election switch in represent, even though Congress is pretty stiffly gerrymandered, and has a lot of safe seats in it. I still think that the Democrats are going to take a majority in both houses.
Really?
Yeah.
In 2018?
Yeah, or come so close as to be as good as, so that they're in the obstructive position that the Republicans are. And the other thing with
Does Trump go crazy with that in the sense that he starts making everything an executive order?
He tries, but there's a limit to that, and Congress holds the money, when it comes down to it. So, as was proven during the little tiff that they had in Britain between the king and the Long Parliament, ultimately who holds the purse strings, runs the show, and Congress holds the purse strings. And also, America has had these flare-ups of populism, which I think we were talking about it earlier. One of the things about populism, in first place, it's a gimme thing. It's like, I want something from the government, gimme, and it's also like a takey thing. It's like your government's giving stuff to other people, and I don't want it. I don't want the government giving, so don't give it to the East Coast bankers, give it to us Indian-hating, lunatic, slave-owning President Jackson era people who muddied up the carpets of the White House. So we've had these prior, like Jackson. Jackson was the last time a populist actually got in the White House. They usually don't make it that far. It's usually more of a thing like the Know Nothing Party. God love the Know Nothing Party. At least they came right out and said that they knew nothing. So,
I forget. There was a president, right? Was Zachary Taylor in the Know Nothing Party? Or?
No, it was Franklin Pierce, although he only ran on the Know Nothing target after he had been president of the United States. So he doesn't quite qualify as a Know Nothing candidate, although close. He was a drunk. Usually it's sort of a William Jennings Bryan kind of populism. Bryan like rose to fame with basically on the promise. He said, America, a lot of Americans don't have enough money, so we'll print more because that works. As we know from Weimar Germany and so on. He sort of burned out. He had the Democratic nomination, I think, 4 different times and never won. And Wilson made him Secretary of State, and he's an avowed pacifist, and next thing Wilson turns around and gets us into World War I. So that was, and ends up, making a monkey of himself, the Scopes trial, So American populism has this tendency to burn out before it does too much damage, although in the case of Jackson, Trail of Tears, expulsion of American Indians from every place east of the Mississippi.
But I would say, though,
destruction of the banking system.
The America now is so different from America then. I'll just point to, look what it costs to live in a city like Manhattan or Los Angeles compared to what it costs to live in, Toledo, Ohio.
Trump territory.
So that disparity is very distressing to many people. It's like what you were referring to is the people who feel they have no control versus the people who have all the control.
But eventually, because of populist scapegoating and because of populist incompetence, like William Jennings Bryan totally misunderstanding the nature of monetary supply, generally the populist fervor wears out. And like I say, it's unusual for a populist to get in the White House. And Andrew Jackson, in fairness, had more bona fides, to be president. Especially if we were going to fight a war. He was not somebody. He's somebody you wanted on your side if you were going to fight a war. But which I suppose is what Trump means by the Civil War. I don't know. Trump's grasp of history doesn't strike me as having much breadth or depth. But so what I think will probably happen is not all that much. I think we'll muddle through one term of Trump as president. He's going to lose control. He doesn't have control of Congress now, but he's going to completely lose control of Congress in 2018, and then we'll have I'm sure there'll be a lot of fireworks, but it'll be more
there's going to be a free-for-all on both sides.
Oh yeah, it'll be a
So who you don't mention any names really for 2020 in this book, but throw out some names. Like You mentioned Barack Obama as a singularity, but what about like Cory Booker?
Cory Booker, yeah. I mean, Cory Booker would be a good, strong candidate, I would think. Elizabeth Warren, if the Democrats want to lose, if they really feel like losing. Bernie will be over 100 by then, so I don't think he's going to be too much of a threat. Coming up on the Republican side, I don't know. A seasoned Marco Rubio might be forgiven his slip-ups. He needs to kind of grow into his persona, but I kind of like him. I saw him again at one of these town hall meetings, and with a somewhat larger audience than Jeb Bush had. He was good. He was really good. He was sympathetic. He got some squirrely questions from the audience. One of those details, veteran benefit details thing from a guy who looked like he was certainly Vietnam, might have even been a Korea vet. And Marco was very patient with answering the guy and very polite and so on, even though he was about half cracked. And he was very good at explaining his positions and so on. So he might come back for, I don't know. I think it's too soon to tell,
Yeah, we don't know what's in it. But, then again, in 2008, in 2004, Obama had already made his name with the, convention, the 2004 convention. And McCain had always been kind of we already knew McCain was going to be probable. And then in 2012, again, like Romney's always been around the picture. I sort of feel like 2020, it is too soon to tell for the first time.
Although, well, not really, because I think you really had to be a close student of politics to have seen Obama coming.
Yeah.
He was kind of it was very late in the day that it became clear that he was the better candidate than Hillary Clinton, and even later in the day when it became clear that he was going to be nominated.
Right.
Because the two are not, the two are two different things. And I don't, even though I cover politics, I don't think I was paying close enough attention. I didn't spot Obama ahead of time.
Who would be a surprise to you in 2020? Who are you not spotting now? Even though it's sort of a weird question, because if you're not spotting them, then you don't know.
Yeah, right. That's one of those unknown unknowns. Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if there'll be.
Who have you discounted so much where they might surprise you? They have some.
Yeah, well, that would be Elizabeth Warren, because I think the burnout of populism is going to affect the left as well as it affects the right. So, and I think that there may be an attempt for the Democrats to play catch-up ball and say, well, okay, we'll nominate a populist, and it'll be too late.
What about ever like, now that we've had a so-called celebrity candidate like Donald Trump, what about ever someone just totally out of left field like a Bill Gates or a Larry Page?
A technocrat. Yeah. I mean, the response to Roosevelt and to a lesser extent Truman's extremely intrusive expansion of government was not at all what people thought. People thought, well, it'll be Adlai Stevenson, he'll carry the torch, But people picked a quiet competence of Dwight Eisenhower. Not exactly a technocrat, but, quiet, competent managerial type. So
and a hero.
And a hero, of course. Yeah, a big hero. Though, it's interesting about Eisenhower is he never saw combat.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, he was an officer, young officer.
The head of the NATO command.
Yeah, I know it. And he was picked because of his remarkable ability, very clear thinking and remarkable ability to get along with people and make people get along with each other, which was no small matter when you had de Gaulle and Montgomery and Churchill and all, and Stalin. Maybe there'll be a return to it. There'll be a new, if you were going to advance spot a trend, maybe the new seriousness, might be a good one. Or it could be, some Jeff Bezos, it could be a technocrat.
Yeah.
I mean, when you think how much better off we would be right now if Mike Bloomberg were president.
Yeah. He was a great mayor here. I mean, he was a
and he's technically a little. I know Mike a little bit. I like to tease him about the.
Why didn't he run?
He ran the numbers. He ran the numbers, and he really dislikes Trump, and he could not figure out a way for him to run as a third-party candidate or to challenge Trump that wouldn't help Trump win. Was basically what it's going to. That's what I'm told. I mean, he didn't tell that to me himself. He's kind of said so in so many words, and I ask around, and he'd put people on it, and nobody does the numbers like Mike. So I'm guessing he was right.
Let's talk career. It's like you've been doing this since the 70s. How did you, I mean, anybody, when I say dream career, anybody would love to just write funny books about smart, intelligent things and travel around and make a good living doing it all of their lives.
Yeah, I have been extremely fortunate, and none of it was planned. I went to school in the '60s, which was not like an era of advanced planning, to say the least. Be here now, live in the moment. And I majored in English in college, basically because in those days you didn't have to pick your major until, I don't know, sophomore year or sometime. I'm a product of the '60s, no advanced planning whatsoever. Live in the moment, be here now, I mean, duh. There is no future. Of course, actually, some people would go on to prove that is literally the case. So I was an English major, and the reason I was an English major was I was going through the course catalog. In my day, you didn't have to pick your major until like even end of sophomore year or something. You had, the core curriculum courses that you had to take. So I'm looking to pick a major, and I'm going through the course catalog, and I see English, and I said, I speak that. How hard could it be?
Right.
So I was on a scholarship, and so I had to maintain a B average. So I took the combination of things that were easy that I liked. I liked to read, and that were easiest for me, and it would be most likely that I could BS my way through. Because, you're taking physics, you can't BS your way through that, or the world explodes, or the planets collide. And so I needed to maintain that B average. So I became an English major. And then I did pretty well at being an English major because you can BS your way through it. And I got a fellowship to go to grad school. And so again, I picked the easiest thing I could find to use the fellowship on.
What's that? I'm gonna have to go back to grad school now.
Yeah, it was like it was a creative writing course at Johns Hopkins. It was a writing seminar at Johns Hopkins, and that looked easy. Just had a very very minimal course load and like very minimal bunch of stuff that you had to turn out. It was only 1 year, and you got your MA. And so I did that and had a great time. And I get out of college and
in Johns Hopkins. Creative writing was John Barth a professor there?
He was not. No, I think he was at one time, but not when I was there. It was run by now his name is going to elude me. He was an incomprehensible American poet of the Ezra Pound generation. In fact, much influenced by Ezra Pound. Indeed, he was probably one of the last people left speaking to Ezra Pound when Ezra Pound finally kicked off. He would actually go see him at St. Mary's Hospital and so on. The heck was his name? Anyway, Mockingbirds at Fort McHenry was his well-known poem, and it's not very well known. And there's a very understandable reason for that. So I get out of school, and now what? So I thought, well, I've been doing all this reading and a certain amount of writing that goes with the reading, and I must know how to write, which was not the case. I didn't. But I didn't know that yet. And so I had, meanwhile, had become friends with some people in Baltimore who were running one of the underground newspapers of the 60s. And this was like 1970. 60s were a little bit over, but we didn't know it yet. And so I went and crashed. I wouldn't say I went to work for them exactly, but I went over and crashed at the office of the underground newspaper. And when we get too broke, we would go out and sell the paper on the street, for a quarter apiece, and then go get something to eat. And it was fun. And I did that for a while. And then it dawned on me that if I was actually going to try and make a living as a writer, as opposed to having a crash pad as a writer, I probably needed to go to New York because New York was at that time, still is.
And how old were you then? Like, when did you feel like, okay, now I got to take this seriously?
I was maybe, I was in my early 20s. Let's see, I was turned 23 in 1970 when I was doing that underground newspaper stuff. And it was probably about, 24, 25 or something before I sort of snapped out of being, do you really want to be a hippie forever?
But it just goes to show, though, it's not like you have to be 18 and be on like your strict career path.
Oh,
like
no.
like you were interested in these things,
Yeah.
you dabbled, but you kind of said, okay, now I'm going to start taking it seriously at age 25. And then still it's not like you then kind of churned out a bestseller then, like that began your apprenticeship of writing.
As a
and
matter
everything.
of fact, on my 25th birthday, I was living on 2nd Street in the East Village, between Avenue B and Avenue C, or as they were called. This is like 1970s.
That looks like a death trap.
Oh, I tell you, it was like, we called it Firebase Baker and Firebase Charlie. You know, I mean, it was, oh yeah. I'm living in this walk-up, one-room walk-up apartment with a 1.5 rooms with the bathtub in the kitchen. You know, the whole Lower East Side schmear. And I turned 25 in 1972, and I remember having like almost like sort of a breakdown. I am sitting there drinking beer, thinking, I am 25 years old. I have done F all.
And so many people 25 think that. And I wish just once they would relax.
Yeah,
But of
I
course you
always try and
can't.
tell people that age. I say, actually, funnily enough, the toughest age of all is like your early 20s, when you're like done with school and you really haven't gotten your footing in your career. So that can be a really tough time. You know, people talk about midlife crisis and they talk about, you know, the horrors of getting old and so on and stuff. But actually, that mid-20s, that can be a bear. You know?
Because you feel like you need to be doing something.
Yeah, I need
when-
to have done something, and I hadn't. you know?
Right.
Yeah.
And the reality is nobody really has. Like only
No.
anecdotes have.
Yeah.
Like Mark Zuckerberg did.
Anecdotes have, yeah. Mark Zuckerberg. And yeah, statistically, the number of people who have accomplished anything by 25 is zero.
Right.
You know, I mean, as a statistical average, it's zero. But I remember sitting there just feeling awful about myself, you know, and then, you know, not long after that, I got a job with a weekly newspaper, a grown-up weekly newspaper in New York, long gone. But, you know, it was kind of a failing enterprise, which turned out to be a good thing because I started as a messenger and wound up as managing editor all in the course of about 4 months because the place was falling apart and people were leaving, you know. So it's my other advice to kids is like, you know, either start with something that's brand new, you know, because, you know, you'll be in on the ground floor if it works and, you know, nothing's lost if it doesn't. Or go to work for like a failing enterprise, like
Right.
Newsweek or something, you know, because you will be valuable as older people with a bigger nut, you know, and more complications in their life flake away from this failing enterprise, you know. Go right to work for Playboy, for gosh sake, you know, for something that is circling the drain.
I'm gonna apply to Playboy tomorrow.
Yeah, there you go, you know. And, you know, I was just hanging around in New York trying to make working at this newspaper and trying to do some freelance stuff and did a little stuff, you know, wrote for the East Village Other, which was a big underground newspaper in the time. It was kind of the competition for the Village Voice, and sort of scrambling along. And one of the guys that I worked with at the East Village Other knew somebody who knew somebody at National Lampoon, you know, and we went and pitched an idea to Doug Kenny, one of the founders. And
What was the idea?
Oh, I know. It was some harebrained thing about Michael Roosevelt, or not Michael Roosevelt, Michael Rockefeller, you know, who had disappeared in New Guinea, about how he was actually alive and like doing a sort of Kurtz, you know, thing. He was, you know, building a private army in the, I don't remember. I don't remember why they let us do it anyway, but we did it and they published it. And I guess, you know, it was maybe it was a month when there was some short on material. And, you know, we got paid a lot for us, you know, and you know, and it went for there. I had always liked the Lampoon from the moment it came out in 1970. And I thought, this really looks like fun. So I just kind of kept plugging away. I wasn't a natural at humor writing, and I wasn't as well educated as some of those kids who started it, you know.
Because there's a lot of Harvard kids at the
Oh,
National
yeah.
Lampoon. There's the Harvard
Wicked
Lampoon.
smart. Yeah,
They left
they-
the Harvard Lampoon and started the National Lampoon.
Exactly. You know, Doug Kenny and Henry Beard, and there was a third guy, Rob. Jesus, my mind is not. Anyway, there were three of them from the Harvard Lampoon, and they were really good. And they had brought in some other people from the Harvard Lampoon. George Trow wrote for the New Yorker for years. You know, he was writing for the National Lampoon.
Well, what do you think is so? The National Lampoon quickly became one of the, I guess, known as one of the funniest magazines in the country, and I mean, and then it spawned off movies like, you know, Animal House and Vacation and so on. You know, with all these became like iconic, you know, funny movies, comedy movies. What do you think is the and you said you weren't good at this type of writing. What's the skill for like humor writing? Like how do you get better at humor writing? What are some of the elements?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I think it helps to have been brought up in a family that communicated with humor. I mean, my advantage, and I think this was some of the other people at the magazine had the same thing. I grew up in this big Irish family whose entire mode of communicating was teasing each other and jokes and stuff. I mean, it would have to be something really, really grim, like the funeral of a child, to snap my family out of that wisecracking. I mean, if they liked something you did, they teased you about it. If they didn't like something you did, they teased you about it. The reaction to sorrow and tragedy and stuff was, some kind of joke. I remember my grandfather died. My grandfather died like a day or two before the 1960 election when Kennedy was elected. My grandfather, as only an Irish Catholic can, I mean, really, really detested the Kennedys. I mean, there's people who don't like the Kennedys, and then there's a certain set of like Irish. And when they disliked,
I thought all the Irish Catholics loved the Kennedys.
Maybe in Boston or someplace.
Okay, like I'm Jewish. If a Jewish person ran for president, it almost doesn't.
You're
and I'm not
in.
even religious, right? Like I could barely.
You'd be in.
Yeah, I'm like, all right, whoever you are.
Yeah,
I'll vote for the first time in my life because I've never voted.
And I'm sure a lot of black people felt that way about Barack Obama. Actually, a lot of us who'd been through the civil rights stuff in the 60s felt that way to a certain extent about Obama. I didn't feel that. Obama. I didn't feel that way so strongly that I voted for him, but when he got elected, I thought, this is pretty cool.
It's
I
different.
can remember. Yeah, I mean, I can remember when, he couldn't sit in the front of the bus, and now he's president of the United States. Well, he could sit in the front of the bus because he hasn't been born, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
I thought it was pretty cool. I think the natural tendency would be, and on the other hand, you can imagine a scenario where it's Bernie Madoff who's running, and you
don't want him to embarrass the race.
you can sort of see through this guy in a way the Goyim cannot.
Right.
So that's kind of the situation with Irish who hate the Kennedys.
And also maybe there was a haves versus have-nots.
My grandfather was pretty well off. It was they consider the old man Joe Kennedy had been like pro-Nazi. He had been. He's kind of shady in his money-making process. The kids grew up in this sort of really privileged way that my grandfather didn't approve of at all. They're reckless, careless, amoral people, the Kennedys. This is, it's hard, I was a kid, but I mean, this is what my grandfather was saying, I mean, that's not how he'd say it, but,
But it's funny because you even mentioned in this book that you were like ethnically a Republican.
Yeah,
almost.
I am. It's mostly my mother's side. But my grandfather was a Republican too. He was a car dealer. Like most small businessmen, he was a Republican too. And he just didn't like that whole thing. And so he dies. He dies right before Kennedy is elected. And the funeral is right at, like the day after. And his sister, my great aunt Helen, comes over and says, it's a good thing your grandfather died when he did, because having Kennedy in the White House would have killed him anyway. So that's just how my family communicated.
Right.
So that's a help, that's one thing. And then I never had any trouble discerning the absurd, but it takes some practice to describe that absurdity, to put it in.
So it's a matter of, like, let's say, constantly being able to observe the absurd.
Yeah.
Right, and then
a natural inclination towards kidding, for lack of another word.
Natural inclination. But I think the natural inclination maybe could be taught, I don't know, or built through practice.
Oh, sure, yeah. Everything's a skill. I mean, one of the things people really don't realize about journalism, because it set itself up, because a whole bunch of people went into journalism that should have gone into Peace Corps. Is it's a trade. It's a trade. You grow up like an Irish kid like me. You don't want to get up early in the morning and lift stuff. You got two choices. You could be a newspaper reporter, or you could be a priest. So you're sitting there thinking, or a cop, right? Yeah. But a cop, people shoot at you if you're a cop. I mean, that's almost as bad as lifting things. Cop, fireman. But the things catch fire. So if you just want to look at things catching fire and look at people getting shot, and you don't want to lift stuff, and you like to read and so on. So it's like priest to reporter, and so you're going like,
Okay, but there are good journalists and bad journalists. You've had 2 #1 New York Times bestsellers. You've been well known in the space for 40 years. So clearly, there's a skill.
oh
and
yeah,
a
it's
set
a
of
craft.
expertise.
It's a craft, and it took me, I'll be fair, it took me a long time to learn that craft. It took me from my middle 20s to my middle 30s.
So PJ O'Rourke, author of How the Hell Did This Happen? The Election of 2016. Not only, I think you hit the trifecta of informative, educational, entertaining. It's very
well,
funny.
thank you.
And you have a 40-year history of writing humor and funny books. Really, I think humorists have a long tradition, from Mark Twain and
Sure.
before then. And, you've been on this podcast twice. I don't know if you know A.J. Jacobs has been on this
Yes.
podcast.
I don't know him.
I consider him a humorist also in that genre, and just great stuff. I highly recommend this book. And I'm a fan of the political game, and this is a good breakdown of what happened. And I highly recommend it. And thanks for coming on the show. Come on again for the 2020 election.
Will do. Absolutely. Schedule me, pencil me in.
Excellent. Thanks, PJ.
You're welcome.
Hey, I am so glad you listened to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please take a moment to subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is you get your podcasts. It will only take you a second, but it will help other people discover the podcast. And my goal is to share this great content with as many people as possible. To see the show notes, just head on over to jamesaltucher.com/podcast. While you are there, you can join my free insiders list to get notified when I post a new podcast. Every day, I also share my best and most controversial ideas. You won't get this stuff anywhere else. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.
AI might be the most important new computer technology ever. It's storming every industry, and literally billions of dollars are being invested. So buckle up. The problem is that AI needs a lot of speed and processing power, so how do you compete without costs spiraling out of control? It's time to upgrade to the next generation of the cloud, Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, or OCI. OCI is a single platform for your infrastructure, database, application development, and AI needs. OCI has 4 to 8 times the bandwidth of other clouds, offers one consistent price instead of variable regional pricing, and of course, nobody does data better than Oracle. So now you can train your AI models at twice the speed and less than half the cost of other clouds. If you want to do more and spend less, like Uber, 8x8, and Databricks Mosaic, take a free test drive of OCI at oracle.com/advance. That's oracle.com/advance. oracle.com/advance.